Hello everyone, we're back trying to make cheese again, I guess. This time I'm making a saged Derby cheese, and I'm guessing that the pronunciation is Derby. It's D-E-R-B-Y, but it's an English cheese, and when the Queen goes to the horse races, it's the Derby, not the Derby. So if anybody out there from the UK can correct me if I'm wrong. But this cheese will have sage put in it, which will make it a green color, a pale green colored cheese. To start with, I have 2 gallons of pasteurized whole milk, and I've put them in my canner here that I use as a double boiler. I had that water up to the boiling point, but I have shut it off. And the goal right now is to increase the temperature to 84 degrees Fahrenheit. And my instructions I'm using is an American recipe, so unfortunately I don't really have the metric version. I think that's 29 degrees in Celsius, but I wouldn't guarantee it. You should check, I guess. And I will put the link down below to the recipe that I'm following. It's one from the cheesemaking.com, New England cheesemaking company, where I have bought all of my supplies so far. Anyway, the first thing to be added here is calcium chloride. A half teaspoon of calcium chloride diluted in a quarter of a cup of either distilled water, or in my case tap water, because I'm on a well, there isn't any chlorine. So I will bring you back once we reach 84 degrees. The milk has reached the target temperature of 84 degrees, and now you add the culture, a mesophilic culture, and like I say, I'm following the recipe that will be down below this video, made by the New England Cheese Company, and I'm using there what they call C101. That's their mesophilic culture, and it's said to use 2/3 to 3/4 of one of their little pouches pre-measured. So I have measured out what I think is close to 3/4, and now this is just sifted on the surface of the milk, trying not to get it all in one spot. And once you have it on the surface, you let it set for 2 minutes to hydrate. Because that was fairly evenly distributed. After a couple of minutes, you stir for 5 minutes or so to get it fully incorporated into the milk. And then you allow the milk to rest for an hour at the target temperature. So you keep checking the temperature. If it drops, you put it back in the hot water bath to bring it up to 84 degrees. So I won't make you watch all that point. I'll bring you back after it has been hydrating and acidifying. Is what this does with the calcium chloride and the culture. It acidifies the milk. So I'll bring you back at that point in an hour's time. Well, the culture is all stirred into the milk, and the timer is set for an hour, so this is a good time to prepare the herb mixture, the sage. It said, I think, like 10 leaves of sage. Well, this is spring, and my leaves aren't that big yet, so I've probably used 15 leaves of sage. And it said you could add a few leaves of spinach. That, not for anything for flavor, but that would make it darker green. Not growing spinach, so I added 2 or 3 leaves of chard and a couple of sections, or small, with a few leaves each, of parsley, Italian flat leaf parsley. I don't think those will alter the flavor very much, but they will put more chlorophyll into the situation here and make a greener cheese, hopefully. Oops, sorry about that. You can do this in a blender. I'm going to use my ancient immersion blender here, and hopefully that will work. That had, by the way, 1/4 of a cup of tap water. You could add anywhere, it said, from 1/4 of a cup to a 1/2 a cup. So I went with the 1/4 cup, not wanting to dilute things too much. I think that's pretty well blended. Once the foam settles, it should be a little bit of dark green anyway, and a nice, yeah, has a nice sage smell to it. So just set that aside. That isn't used until much later in the process, but at least it's prepared. It's been an hour, and I did adjust the temperature just once. It had started to drop a little bit, so I brought it back up to the 84 degrees, because this next step is adding the rennet, and that's a half teaspoon of rennet. I'm using an animal rennet, diluted in a quarter of a cup of water, and for a minute you stir in an up and down motion to get it thoroughly mixed in. But now you can't raise the temperature again, so it was important to have it at 84 degrees when you start this process. Once I've been stirring for a minute here, I will cover it and just let it set for 45 minutes and bring you back at that point. Well, it's had its 45 minutes, and I've stuck my little finger in and got a clean break, so we do have a curd produced. I think I haven't mentioned previously, it's sort of standard I guess in all of these videos, but I'll say it again. Everything that I'm using has been sanitized or sterilized. I did it this time with boiling water. I boiled everything. In the past I've used a dairy sanitizer, which I still have, but I thought it was easier to boil it this time, I guess. So now you cut the curd using a curd cutter. This is a giant cake spatula, I guess, for decorating cakes, but it does a good job. 1/2-inch cuts. I will go the whole way across doing it this way, and then turn and go back and do it this way, and I will come back at that point. Well, I've made my cross patch cuts there, and now with the cheese ladle you go down roughly 1/2 inch each revolution until you reach the bottom of the pot. Sometimes my 1/2 inches are bigger than other 1/2 inches. The next stage after I do this is gently stirring it for 5 minutes. So if anything pops up that looks particularly large, cut it. Nice firm curd. I just hit the bottom at last. Okay. Now I will just gently stir for 5 minutes. Set the timer there and stir for 5 minutes. I'll bring you back at the end of the 5 minutes to discuss the next bit of the process. I see where some of those are quite large. I'll be cutting them up. Well, I've been stirring for 5 minutes, and now you let it settle for 5 minutes. Just occasionally giving it a little stir so that it's going to settle down some below the whey, but you don't want it to form a large coagulated clump at the bottom of the pot either. So during that 5 minutes period, 2 or 3 times you give it a little stir. And I forgot to mention that it's important at this stage also, this stage I just went through and the next stage, to maintain the 84 degree temperature. So far I haven't had to put it back in the hot water bath. It's been maintaining that temperature. So I'll bring you back in 5 minutes time. Curd has settled. I think I stirred it maybe 3 times during that period of time. Next is the cooking process. Over a 15-minute period, you gradually increase the temperature to 92 degrees Fahrenheit. And you do that in increments. Now it is still reading 84. I'll let it go to 86 or 87 and then take it off and stir for a minute or two and put it back on and slowly increase the temperature. This is called cooking the curd. Also, it is called drying the curd. Obviously not dry, it's sitting in whey, but it dries out the interior of the curd. It takes a lot of the whey out of the curd when you're doing this. So I will bring you back in 15 minutes time. Mine's gone a little bit more than 15 minutes, maybe 18 or so, because they tell you to do a test. You take a handful of it with your impeccably clean hand, as Julia Child would say, and squeeze it into a mass like that. And then it should break easily with your thumb, which this is now doing. And that sort of means, I guess, that it's dry enough. So I went a few extra minutes because the first time I tried that it didn't work too well. I think it's working correctly that time. I don't know. I haven't mentioned yet in this video that I'm a complete amateur cheese maker. Each time I make one of these videos of a different cheese, it's the first time that I've made it. Now you remove the whey down to the level of the curd using a clean ladle, sterilized ladle. I'm going to be saving the whey this time, except for the green whey later on. I want to attempt to make a Scandinavian type of whey cheese. Halvor in Norway sent me one. I won't attempt to pronounce it, Halvor. I want to try to make something like it. It's made with whey. It doesn't have to be aged or anything, but it takes 8 to 12 hours to make it because you slowly boil down the whey. It becomes a brown, almost caramel color. And you add cream at the end and boil that down. Anyway, the one that he sent me I really liked. It has a sweet flavor. There's no sugar added. It's just the natural sugars in milk or whatever that have been concentrated. I think probably I've reached as far as I'm going to go here without putting it through the cheesecloth. Anyway, I really liked it, so I want to try to make my own. It's a brown cheese, which is unusual for here. Don't know if I've ever seen anything like it in the market here, but that will be out before this video comes out because this cheese will age 4 to 6 weeks at least before I use it. So now the rest of this is poured through a colander lined with butter muslin, and I'll show you that in just a minute. There's my colander lined with butter muslin, and it's over the pot that I'm trying to collect the whey in. This pot is heavy. Now this gets stirred several times as it's losing its way to make sure that it all gets out of there, I guess. What I'm going to have to do is to put it back in the large pot because the level of the whey is too high in that one. So quickly over here without making too much of a mess, hopefully. See that or not. But for the next 5 minutes or so, occasionally I will stir this to encourage most of the whey to drip down out of it, and I'll bring you back at the next step. For the next 2 hours, the process is called cheddaring. Derby is a type of cheddar, just not aged as long as cheddar is aged. The recipe is similar to making cheddar. And I have drained a lot of the whey out. This is a food grade plastic container here. There's the curd in a butter muslin. get it folded over so I don't lose the curd all over the place. Okay, so that will be alright. Turn it over. And you place 4 to 6 pounds of weight on it. Water is recommended because it should be at 90 degrees. Every 15 minutes I will rewrap it, dump out or save any of the whey that has expelled, and put this back on top of it again. I'll probably show doing that 1 or 2 times during the next 2 hours, but for the next 2 hours we are cheddaring. Well, this is the end of the first 15-minute period. I think I mentioned that it's important to keep this water between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit to keep the curd warm down below it. I just checked, it's about 86 right now, so I won't have to do anything to it this time, but the next time around I'll probably empty some of the water out and put more warm water in. And it has accumulated a fair amount of whey, which is going to go in my whey container over here. Now, hard to do from this angle, but it gets flipped and rewrapped somehow here. Maybe easier said than done. So I guess. Want the raw edges of the cheesecloth under it so that the curd won't get squeezed out. Pretty much managed to do that, I guess. Jug back on for another 15 minutes. This mark is how I know that I've got 6 pounds of water in there. I put a mark on the edge of the jug. So I'll probably do this a couple of more times before I bring you back to show you how things are going. It's now been 2 hours of turning it and dumping out the whey and whatever. And now it's time to break it up into smaller pieces. It says walnut or hazelnut size, so it's quite solid now. But I'm just going to break it up into smaller chunks. The next phase is to salt it, and then after that, of course, is adding the sage solution. To salt it, you need to know what the weight of the curd is. And I have weighed it, and then you take 2% of the weight of the curd, and that's the amount of salt that you add. So I have mine come out that it needed 20 grams. I'm doing that part in metric. I don't know what that is in ounces. This is confusing, isn't it? Anyway, the description and recipe is down below. But 20 grams of a fine non-iodized salt will be added, and you add that in about 3 applications, allowing it to dissolve and start to remove some of the excess whey from the curd each time. Well, this is going to take me a few minutes, and I don't think you need to watch me breaking up cheese curd. So I'll bring it back when it's time to add the salt. There are the curds all broken up. I'll try to divide this salt into thirds here. In my case I said 2 grams of salt, but it's 2% of the weight of the dried curd. Oh. Let it set for a few minutes between each addition, so I'll bring you back when I've finished adding all of the salt. All the salt has been added, and it took me 4 applications, I guess, to get it all in there. Wait in between times for it to dissolve. It isn't really extracting a lot of whey, but it's making the surface of each one of those pieces of curd wet. And according to the instructions, the recipe, whatever, that will help increase the flavor of the sage mixture that I'm just about to add. Here we go with green cheese. Of course, most of the chlorophyll, the dye from the herbs that I use, it won't penetrate the entire depth of each piece of curd, so that's what gives it sort of a mottled look, a veined look in the finished product. Hopefully that's what mine will look like in the finished product. I'll stir this a few more times and let it rest for a few minutes and come back and try to get it in the cheese mold. That's my cheese mold lined with butter muslin. And now, I might as well use my hands. I'm going to have to be stuffing it in there anyway. I've just washed them. Hoping I'll be able to cram all of this into the mold, or at least as much of it as is possible, because the weights that you put on with the cheese press will force out more whey and shrink the volume of it down. So you want to get as much as possible in your mold. It looks like it's all going to go in there, I guess. Throwing it around here. I'm just concerned about it consolidating when you're underweight, but supposed to. We'll see if it does or not. Anytime I've ever done this before, it wasn't as dry a curd that you were using. The final pressure is, well, make sure of that in a few minutes, but I think the final pressing overnight, 12 hours or so, is 50 pounds. But you've got to get it to hold together to take it out of the mold and turn it every time when you increase the weight. So time will tell here, I guess. I'll bring you back once I've got it under the cheese press for the first time. Well, I got it all in the mold and I have it under pressure for 30 minutes. It's supposed to be 15 pounds of pressure, but because of the way this press works and the weights that I have it at the position on the arm that it doubles the weight of the pressure, and I have 8 pounds on it, so that is 16 pounds of pressure instead of 15. I doubt if that makes any great difference. And it goes for 30 minutes at this weight. I'm still not so sure that this can be salvaged, but you didn't get to see the first turn. I took it out of the mold like I've done and unwrapped it and tried to turn it, and as you can see, it's very loosely put together. It was just falling apart. I basically just put it back in and did the second weight at 20 pounds for an hour. It is a bit more solid, so I may continue with this. I don't know, but it isn't what I thought it would be. You can't handle it now anyway, and how it's ever going to get all of those spaces filled in, I'm not sure. Time will tell. Well, I will bring it back and show you when I have it back in the cheese press again. I was certainly discouraged after the first time, but it is a little more solid now. And this is supposed to be 35 pounds of pressure for 2 hours, and what I've got is 36 pounds. All of these first three are on the place where it multiplies it by 2, and that's 15 pounds, so that makes 30 pounds. And over here we have a place that multiplies it by 3, and I have a 2-pounder there, so that's 6. So altogether 36 pounds. And for 2 hours. We'll leave it and see what it looks like at the end of 2 hours. Well, 2 hours have passed. It isn't expelling a lot of whey, which is what the instructions, the recipe said not to expect it to. I guess because of that 2-hour period with the water jug on it or whatever. Let's see what this looks like now after 2 hours of green muslin. Well, it is improving, I will say that. I was very discouraged after it fell apart. Should have saved that video to show you. I was going to throw the whole thing out, then I said no, I will pack it back in and go at it again and see what happens. I don't know what's ever going to happen with these creases down along here, but the next process is to rewrap it, put it back in the mold, and back in the cheese press at 40 to 50 pounds pressure, optional which you use. In my case I'm going to use 50, and it stays that way overnight. So we will know in the morning, I guess, what this thing looks like. It also says, though, if it still hasn't got rid of all of those, that you can press it longer, so I don't know what to expect. Well, I will get it back in the cheese press and give you a look at what it looks like with 50 pounds pressure on it. That is 50 pounds pressure. 10-pound weight is out here on the end of the arm where it multiplies it by 3.5, so that's 35 pounds. And there's 5 more pounds on this section here which multiplies it by 3, so that's 15. 35 and 15 is 50. Simple mathematics. It's the only mathematics I was ever any good at. Anyway, it now sets overnight, so I will see you in the morning and we'll see what this thing looks like after it is set with 50 pounds pressure on it for, I don't know, 10 to 12 hours, something like that. Well, it's been in the press for 12 hours. I just removed it. I don't know, it's not perfect, I guess. As you can see, there are still some lines showing. I don't think any amount of pressing would remove those, at least not at 50 pounds of pressure. So this is what I'm going to go with. It now it's on a cheese board there with a mat, these cheese mats, so that the air circulates under it as well. I'll now just cover it lightly with cheesecloth, and it air dries for a couple of days before you wax it. So I'll bring you back at the waxing stage. 2 days later, the cheese has dried and I have waxed it. Previously, I've been waxing my cheese, the hard cheeses that I make, with beeswax, because I thought I would really like that, it being a natural product and everything. However, I find it very difficult to get it off the cheese, so I have switched. I've bought a, well, they just label it as a cheese wax, a synthetic wax, whatever, that's designed for using on cheese. I bought a clear one. You can have a choice of clear or red. And this has been waxed. I've dipped it 2 or 3 times, and I've taken the paintbrush and gone around it with wax. There's so many crevices and cracks in that cheese, and I want to try to get it well sealed so the air can't get to it. And now it ages for 6 weeks in a temperature range of 52 to 56 degrees Fahrenheit and at 80% relative humidity. And that's always been the difficult part for me. I can get the temperature range no problem with the cheese fridge, little fridge that I'm using, and the external cheese thermostat that I bought. I can get it in that range. It will cycle between 54 and 56, or in that area anyway. But maintaining 80% humidity has been a problem. And finally, I got thinking about this. When you do, like I've done camembert or triple creme, they go in this food grade container with a sealed lid on the top in the refrigerator, and that produces the high humidity because there isn't any wax on those cheeses, and they're very soft, wet cheese, so the moisture coming out produces the high humidity. So I got thinking about it and thought I will use the same thing. I've had it set up for a couple of days and it's working very well. This has been open for several minutes and it's still reading above 80% humidity. The temperature has gone up since I brought it out. But the cheese itself is on a cheese mat, so it's not going to be sitting in any moisture. And I've just taken a clean dishcloth and wet it and put it in the corner in there. When I seal that up, that maintains the humidity. So hopefully that will work. And about every day I will be opening it up and turning the cheese over. So 6 weeks time, we'll see what this tastes like. Well, 6 weeks have gone by. It's been in the cheese fridge for 6 weeks, being turned daily or almost daily. Sometimes I forget to turn it. From that camera angle, it probably looks like a 50-pound wheel of cheese, but that's the same little cheese that we made 6 weeks ago. I'm going to cut a wedge out of it and see what I think of it. It is dense, I'll tell you that much. Rubbing things on the floor here. Sorry about that. Well, you can see the nice green sage all through it anyway. Let's see if I can get some of the wax off and taste this. Not having tasted it, I say that my plans are at this point anyway to re-wax the area where I just cut it and put it back in to age it further. Derby is a type of cheddar, or similar to a cheddar. 6 weeks is pretty young, so I'll put it back in and see what it turns out to be a little bit later on. It has a bit of a tang to it already. And of course I can taste the sage. It's very fresh. And if I remember correctly, it's been 6 weeks ago, but I remember correctly, it wasn't brined. So it does taste very fresh. There's not a saltiness to it at all, but it has a nice tangy, sharp flavor already. So I will re-wax that wound and put it back in the cheese fridge and age it for another month or two to see if it improves in its flavor any. Well, thank you very much for watching. I will post this video on YouTube in the next few days.